All right, I want to start the debate simply. Does America have a gun problem? Does anybody here disagree with that?
America has a gun problem.
What's the gun problem?
The gun problem is too many people are dying from gun-inflicted injuries.
So you see, it's gun deaths. You see the problem. What's the biggest problem?
The intensity of the weapons. I mean, the magnitude of the weapons that we have at our disposal now. Military weapons in people's hands, civilians. It's a problem.
The biggest problem is the debate, and there's no easy solution. It's really complicated.
Noelle, what do you see as the problem with guns?
The problem is I don't think we know exactly what the problem is. That I don't necessarily, I can't necessarily say or agree that it is the gun that's the problem, right. Because knives can also, kitchen knives, ropes, anything could really be a weapon if that's what you really chose to have it be. So I'm not sure what the underlying cause of that is, and that's what I think needs to be addressed. So
what's one thing you wish we would try when it comes to guns, and you don't understand why we haven't?
I'm inclined to think it would be worthwhile to stipulate that all exchanges of firearms have to go through licensed dealers, and they are responsible to do the background checks and make sure that I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. If we're not using the laws on the books and some things are falling through the cracks that way, new legislation isn't going to fix that.
Betsy, what's something you wish governments would have tried or have tried, or you would like to see us try?
You know, I'm gonna put a big issue out on the table, which is that I think that we should regulate semi-automatic high-velocity rifles in the same way that we regulate automatic rifles. I think that would have stemmed a lot of loss of life.
Let me ask you this, with the Second Amendment, because I think this is also, right, is in the dispute that overturned the D.C. gun ban, essentially the argument the court made is your right to bear arms is absolute, but it can be regulated. There can be some regulation. And I think that's where we're starting. So I don't know if a ban can constitutionally hold up.
I think the issue...
An AR-15 ban. I don't know. And I'm going to, but that's something that we haven't tested that promise.
I think the issue with the Second Amendment is what kind of weapons they were talking about. Military weapons. I know some people believe that it's important for ordinary citizens to have whatever weapons the government has, because the government may come to get us someday and we want to be able to defend ourselves. So I can see a little bit of a logic to that, but I don't really agree with it.
Let me ask this. Why shouldn't there be different, does anybody think there should be different rules for purchasing different weapons, right? Which means, how would you feel, Noelle, if it was harder for the average person to buy an AR-15, but they could still buy one, but the background check were longer or something like that? When does that infringe, do you believe it does infringe upon the Second Amendment?
Honestly, this is where I get stuck every single time. So the Second Amendment, of course, the right to have a militia for the purpose of promoting a free society. But then it follows thereafter with the right to bear arms shall not be infringed. It's not the government's...
We have to argue over the comma, right?
Yeah, it's not saying that the government shall provide the right to bear arms. Right. It's a right that's predating the Constitution itself and saying that it shall not be infringed for these purposes.
Right.
So if we're going to just discuss from a constitutional angle, I have trouble finding where the regulation lies as to why the government can have some, other people can't have them. You know, that seems to be kind of...
Well, we've decided, obviously, that some things we are going to keep, right? No machine guns. We're not going to allow people to have rocket-propelled, shoulder harnessed, We have drawn the line somewhere. But where you're struggling is whether you make it closer.
Where's that line? And if we're just going to be speaking, not even practically, if we're just going to be speaking constitutionally, where is that line?
Where do you see the line, Hans?
I don't have a clear idea of where the line ought to be. I think that ordinary citizens ought not have the right to have nuclear weapons or F-35s or M1 Abrams tanks and the like.
Sure.
And, you know, if someone is saying, well, citizens ought to be able to rise up against an oppressive government, an AR-15 isn't going to cut the mustard, buddy. You know, you need some serious firepower if you're going to overthrow your government. So we ended up drawing a line, which strikes me as kind of arbitrary.
Let's talk about the AR-15, because that's when we say it, that's what it is. Someone make the case for owning an AR-15 for me. Now, and I don't mean it like I'm not trying, but like why? Maybe you have a friend that has one. Why should that be for sale to anybody in the public? What's the case for it?
Well, generally speaking, I mean, an AR-15 is a semi-automatic rifle, and mechanically, I mean, it's no different than a hunting rifle. They're both semi-automatic. I mean, we could certainly talk about magazine sizes or the velocity of the ammunition that's used, but an AR-15 by itself, and I own, you know, an AR-15 lookalike, but it's a 22. You know, so I mean, that's not the type of gun we're talking about here. But mechanically, it's the same sort of thing. You pull the trigger, you get one bullet.
Do you think the AR-15 gets a bad name?
Yeah. I think we tend to lump in too many things under that heading as an assault weapon, and it's just a semi-automatic rifle.
And I would challenge that. I don't think that it's just a semi-automatic rifle. I think that hunting rifles are designed differently. They're designed to shoot bullets actually at higher velocity over a farther distance with the goal of a single shot traveling a long distance to kill an animal. An AR-15 is designed to kill people. It's designed to inflict maximum damage at a much closer range and to fire bullets in rapid succession. And I do think that they're different in purpose and in construction.
But I guess I would just say an AR-15 doesn't fire, one that I could buy doesn't fire any faster than a semi-automatic rifle, hunting rifle.
Well, what I think about those rifles is that AR-15s have higher magazine clip capacities, and so you can shoot a whole range of bullets before you need to reload, whereas a hunting rifle tends to have a different action, pump action or something like that doesn't let you fire that number of bullets in such rapid succession.
One thing about the mental health, the types of mental health issues that make you prone to kill people are extremely rare. Excluding people, you know, because they have depression. I suffer from depression. That's not, you know, most people with mental health issues are far more likely to be a victim of crime than to be a perpetrator.
I feel like that we've shown why it's politically been so hard. I think that you see that that part's intractable. What I don't think is intractable are two things that you all have touched on. One is figuring out how to make it harder for a mentally ill person to get a gun. I think everybody agrees that's got to be stopped. This intervention with young youth, I mean, the school shooting thing, I mean, how many more clues do we need to have? It's always a young male who's got some trouble. So we have a mental health particularly, and I think we ought to look at. And then the other is finding a way to educate. So let's try, if the whole goal here is to find a solution. So what are some solutions? But I think we all can agree if somebody that decides to go and shoot up more than one person is probably mentally unstable. Do we know any mentally stable people that do that aren't in the military? I mean, like, that's always what I get at. Like, by definition, if you've made the decision to murder somebody in cold blood,
yeah, and how do we catch
you've
that?
Snapped.
How do we notice
and
that?
That's, yeah.
Sure.
And I think that one thing that we don't know a lot about are, the underlying causes, of these shootings. I think that there's not a lot of research that's been done looking at gun violence as a public health epidemic. And I think
this new bill is supposed to open the door for more research.
And I think that that's absolutely critical because it is a public health epidemic. And I'm not just talking about school shootings. I'm talking about the suicides. And I'm talking about the neighborhood shootings. And the more that we know about that, the more research that's done, the better we will be able to target our solutions.
We have enough research. I mean, the problem is, and I'm going to cross the line of race here for a minute. When white kids are killing each other, it's a problem. And all of a sudden it becomes a national epidemic and a national issue that we need to spend $100 million in Wisconsin on for safety and security in schools. But when black kids are shooting each other in poor neighborhoods because They don't have jobs, don't even have the idea of a job in the future for themselves because everything's boarded up. Things have moved away. Businesses have shut down. Mom and dad aren't together. Mom and dad have struggles getting work. The educational systems that we send our children to are bankrupt or with very few resources. They don't provide the inspiration that children should get in their education.
Honestly, I think we can all agree that there definitely needs to be more research as to the underlying reason as to why this is happening in the first place, because we all can see that it is clearly a problem, whether it's the school shooting or individuals. And I think we think it's some sort of, maybe a little stronger than just saying I think we all think, but mental health is a concern with it, but the root cause, I don't know. Maybe more research, maybe some restrictions, whether it be the bullet count, that's not necessarily regulating the gun itself.
But regulating magazines.
Magazines, or the bullet amount, or something like that, or maybe...
the intensity of the...
Yeah, that maybe there's something like that. Maybe that makes sense. I'm not an expert. I'm not a gun mechanic, so...
Yeah, you're a citizen.
Yeah.
No, that's what everybody here is an expert because you're citizens. Davi, what have you learned here that's possible, and what do you see as impossible?
Well, I've got three things. The first is close the gun show loophole. Make it a little harder for people to get these kinds of weapons. Crack down, better background checks, especially for semi-automatic weapons. And the third one, I would say, is in terms of mental health, I think we need to focus on reaching people who are isolated and taking care of each other, keeping an eye on the people who are maybe dangerous or having a really hard time and try to get them help before it's too late.
Scott, what'd you take away? Would you advocate more money to the ATF, more resources to ATF so they could do this? Sure. But they always say resources is an issue with making the background, because the argument will be made, hey, there is a lot can be done with the background check system. We just don't have the resources. That's what ATF. Hans, what's possible, what's impossible?
I'm going to build on Scott's culture comment. I think generally speaking, a lot of our problems in this country come down to the fact that we're more concerned about our rights and entitlements than our obligations to one another, to know our neighbors, to pay attention to those troubled kids. Nobody's going to come, the federal government can't come over the helicopter and solve all this stuff. It's like knitting. There's just a lot of little things that need to be knitted together. And that's not just, I'm not going to discount some of the regulations, background checks, that's better statistics. But meanwhile, there are over 300 million of us out here. And there's an awful lot we could do in our daily lives. And a lot of it comes down to getting to know our neighbors and paying attention to what's going on around us. And we might be the one that spots that kid that's falling through the cracks. His mom and dad aren't there taking care of him for whatever reason. And maybe gets hazed at school or whatever. And we say, here's a soul. This is a human soul. and that soul needs me.
Patricia?
I agree that the biggest problem facing our country right now is apathy. You know, we'll talk about it when it's in the news, and then we go about our lives. So we really have to kind of have a change of heart and actually want to look for solutions. And where I see we are right now, the other thing we really need to do is research. You know, what is actually going to make a difference versus what sounds good on paper. You know, that's what we need, and we'll need money for it, but that's where we have to start research.
Colleen, what'd you take away?
A few things. One, I think we'll produce a lot of research that'll sit on the shelves and take forever to implement. I think that the greatest chance is probably a stronger background check. It's also confirmed for me that our children are their best lobbyists, that adults aren't good lobbyists for children today. But I do think that the opportunity exists. I mean, we've got to be bold. I would love to see a tax, just like we tax cigarettes. I would love to see a special tax, a big surcharge put on weapons, and that those resources be used to invest in a healthy, productive, and responsible society. Healthy mental health issues, wellness issues, productive education, workforce development, workforce training. You know, I would love to see these companies that are making money hand over fist pay something into society that makes the society better, and I think there's an opportunity to do that. But I hope our kids take up that mission.
I come away with this thinking having a productive and civil discussion is possible. And I think having discussions like this rather than meme battles over Facebook or pick your social media platform, it's really productive because I think it helps depoliticize the issue.
Look, Wisconsin is, I always like being here because it's sort of in many ways, you know, founding of the Republican Party, founding of the progressive movement. It's all right here in Wisconsin, although some Republicans argue that it wasn't necessarily in Wisconsin. But there's something about the citizenry of Wisconsin that makes you guys not want to yell at each other. So I really appreciate that. You make nice work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, NBC News fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here, and then click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.